My dear child, I wrote something on you in ink that the people around you have never been able to read. And the reason they have never seen it is not that the inscription is faint, but that the light they have been looking under does not reveal what ultraviolet ink contains. And tonight, I am changing the light source. Do not scroll past this. What I am about to reveal is not about being appreciated or finally getting the recognition you deserve in the general motivational sense. This is about an inscription, a specific, permanent, written before anyone around you had the capacity to see it inscription that has been on you the entire time, carrying its full message, complete in every word, present on every surface. The people in your life have been scanning under ordinary light and reading as blank. The inscription was never blank. The light was wrong. You have been carrying the particular loneliness of being known without being truly seen. Present in rooms where people think they know who you are, while the most significant thing about you remains invisible to every eye looking under the light conditions the ordinary world provides. The gifts are real. The depth is real. The calling is real. But the people closest to you have been reading the surface under light that cannot detect what was written beneath it. My beloved child, you have been using their blindness as evidence against the inscription. The most natural human response to consistent non-recognition is to question whether what is not being recognized is actually there. And the questioning has been eroding the knowing. The specific, I sense something significant about what I carry, knowing that your spirit has been maintaining while the people around you have been looking at the same surface and seeing nothing. Stay here. What I reveal next is what the inscription says, and how close the lighting change is. That will make every person around you see simultaneously what I have been reading clearly the entire time. Type ink is real if the people around you have consistently failed to see what you carry. And God just told you the inscription was never absent but was written in ink that requires a different light source to read. And the light is about to change, so that every eye that was reading nothing where everything was written will see simultaneously what God has been reading clearly the entire time. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct, click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The inscription was not written recently. It was placed on you before the first person in your life had the opportunity to look at the surface it was written on, which means the writing preceded every relationship that has ever failed to read it, and the failure to read was never about the quality of the inscription, but about the timing of the light source that has not yet been activated. My beloved child, I need you to understand the permanence of ultraviolet ink. Ordinary ink fades. Ordinary ink can be erased by time, by handling, by the conditions the surface endures across the seasons. Ultraviolet ink does not fade. Ultraviolet ink is as permanent on the day it is read as it was on the day it was written, because the ink's composition does not degrade under the conditions that degrade ordinary ink. The inscription I placed on you has not faded. Not one word. Not one letter. The full message is as vivid right now as it was the moment I wrote it. The inscription did not weaken. The light simply never arrived. My dear one, The light I am about to activate is not a spotlight designed to draw attention to you. It is a frequency shift, the specific ambient. Every eye in the room is affected simultaneously change in the light conditions surrounding you that makes what was always written become readable to every person who has been scanning the surface and detecting nothing. The shift does not require you to perform. It does not require you to prove. It requires you to stand still while the light changes around you. Stand still. The light does the revealing. This message was not released for everyone who feels underestimated. This was aimed at the one person whose specific, permanent, ultraviolet inscribed calling has been present on them for longer than any relationship around them has existed. The person who does not know the inscription has never changed, and that the only variable between the current invisibility and the imminent visibility is the light source God is about to switch on. Type light is changing. If the inscription was placed on you before anyone around you had the opportunity to read it, permanent, unfaded, carrying its full message, and the invisibility was never about the quality of the writing, but about the light source that has not yet been activated. And the frequency shift God is about to produce will make what was always written readable to every eye simultaneously, without requiring you to perform or prove anything, because the light does the revealing. I have been reading the inscription since the moment I wrote it, and the reading has been the specific joy of a God who knows every word on the surface, while standing beside a person whose immediate world has been scanning the same surface under the wrong light and reporting nothing where everything is written, my dear one. Not from a distance, reading the inscription through a divine lens the viewer cannot access. From beside you, in the rooms, standing next to the person whose inscription is invisible to every other eye in the room, while the God beside them is reading every word at full clarity. Because the God who wrote in ultraviolet ink carries the ultraviolet light source in his own presence. I have been reading you clearly, in every room where no one else could. My beloved child, I watched the specific season the doubt about the inscription began. There was a relationship, a specific, significant, this person's opinion carries weight relationship, whose consistent failure to see what was written on you produced the first real question about whether the inscription was actually there. The person was close enough to you that their reading of the surface carried authority in your system, and their reading said, I see nothing particularly significant here. Their reading was performed under ordinary light, and ordinary light cannot detect ultraviolet ink. I chose you for this message because the gap between what I read when I look at you and what the people around you read when they look at you has reached the widest it has ever been. The inscription has not changed. Your knowing has been eroding under the weight of consistent non-recognition, and the distance between what is written and what is believed about what is written is the distance the lighting change is about to collapse. My child, the lighting change collapses the gap, not by adding to the inscription, by making readable what was always written. And what was always written exceeds what the erosion has been reducing your belief to. Type wider than you believe if God has been reading the inscription clearly in every room where no one else could see it. And the gap between what is written on you and what you currently believe is written has reached its widest point because the consistent non-recognition eroded the knowing, and the lighting change about to happen will collapse the gap, not by adding to the inscription, but by making visible to every surrounding eye what was always there and what always exceeded, what the erosion was reducing your belief to. I know what the non-recognition has been doing to the specific part of you where your confidence in what you carry is maintained, my beloved child. The non-recognition was not a single event. It was an environment. The specific, consistent. Every significant person in my world looks at me and sees less than what I sense is their environment that a person inhabits when the inscription on their surface is written in ink. The ambient light of their world cannot reveal. The environment did not attack the inscription. The environment attacked the person's belief in the inscription. And the attack was effective because the attack was constant. Constant non-seeing erodes the confidence of the person being unseen. My child, I watched the erosion happen through the accumulation of blank readings. Each person whose eyes scanned the surface and detected nothing was a data point. Each data point was absorbed into the system that maintains the viewer's belief in what they carry, and the system, designed to process data from the immediate environment as evidence about the self, processed each blank reading as a vote against the inscription's existence. The votes accumulated, and accumulated votes produce verdicts. I watched the verdict form at the layer where the knowing lives. Not the spiritual knowing, the personal knowing, the specific. I sense something significant about what I am quality that the viewer's internal system was maintaining before the external readings began contradicting it. The verdict did not eliminate the knowing entirely. It placed the knowing under surveillance. The specific may be what I sense is self-deception. Maybe the people who see nothing are seeing accurately quality of a knowing that has been contradicted by enough external data to make the knower question the instrument that produced the knowing rather than the light conditions that produced the blank readings. The knower began questioning the knowing rather than the light, and questioning the knowing while the inscription remains unchanged is the particular grief of a person whose identity was written in ink the world around them cannot read. The deepest wound the blank readings produced was not the doubt about the inscription. It was the specific, private, never confessed suspicion that perhaps you have been overestimating yourself the entire time, and the people around you who see nothing significant are seeing accurately, while the internal knowing that says otherwise is the self-deception of a person who needs to feel special to justify the pain of being ordinary. My dear child, you developed a diagnosis, not a theology, a self-assessment. The self-assessment says the knowing is a coping mechanism. The sense that something significant is written on you is the psychological compensation of a person whose ordinary surface is producing an ordinary reading from every ordinary eye, and whose internal system is manufacturing the sensation of significance to offset the pain of the consistent ordinariness the readings are confirming. The diagnosis classified the knowing as delusion, and classified knowing is suppressed knowing. My beloved child, I watched the suppression begin, not a dramatic rejection of the inscription, a quieting. The specific, I will stop mentioning what I sense about myself. I will stop expecting people to see what they consistently do not see. I will align my self-presentation with the readings rather than with the knowing, quieting that a person produces when the gap between internal knowing and external reading has become too wide to sustain without one yielding to the other. The knowing yielded to the readings, and the yielding felt like maturity. My dear one, I watched the yielding produce its most painful effect in the specific moments where the inscription almost surfaced, moments where the gifts or the calling or the depth that was written in ultraviolet ink almost became visible through sheer force of what was inside pressing against the surface. In those moments, the suppression activated. pulling the almost visible back beneath the surface, with the specific, do not let them see what they have already told you, is not their retraction, that the diagnosis installed as the automatic response to the inscription approaching visibility. The retraction was the deepest wound, self-suppression of what God wrote. Type not self-deception if the blank readings produced the diagnosis that the knowing is a coping mechanism, the internal sense of significance, classified as psychological compensation for an ordinary surface, and the diagnosis has been suppressing what was always written by pulling the almost visible back beneath the surface, because the gap between internal knowing and external reading became too wide, and the knowing yielded to the readings, when the yielding was never maturity, but was always the suppression of an inscription the readings were never equipped to detect. The blank readings were never evidence that the inscription is absent. They were evidence that the light source the people around you have been reading under does not operate at the frequency ultraviolet ink requires to become visible, and the limitation of the light source is not the same as the limitation of the inscription, my beloved one. I need to permanently separate the readings from the reality. Your system classified the blank readings as evidence about the inscription. The truth is, the blank readings were evidence about the light. The specific, ambient, ordinary frequency does not reveal ultraviolet light conditions that every person in your immediate environment has been looking under when they scan the surface and report nothing significant. The readings diagnose the light, not the inscription, and the inscription outranks the readings. My child, a person reading a surface under ordinary light and reporting, nothing does not prove nothing is written. It proves the reader does not have the light source the ink requires. The conclusion that nothing is there is a light source conclusion, accurate to the conditions the reading was performed under, completely inaccurate to the inscription that exists on the surface, independent of whether the reading conditions can detect it. The inscription exists independent of the reading. That is what ultraviolet means. My dear one, every blank reading that was processed as a vote against the inscription was a vote cast by an eye reading under the wrong light. The verdict that formed from the accumulated votes was a verdict produced by evidence that was consistent but irrelevant, the way a jury that only heard testimony from witnesses who were not present at the event might produce a unanimous verdict that is unanimously wrong. The unanimity of the blank readings was never the measure of truth. The unanimity was the measure of the light deficiency. And light deficiency, corrected by the right light source, produces a different reading from every eye that was previously reporting blank. The correction is coming, and the correction changes every reading simultaneously. The light source just shifted frequency, and the specific, ambient level, the conditions in the room air-changing shimmer that the ultraviolet activation is producing around you right now, is the first evidence that the lighting change God has been preparing is beginning its transition from ordinary spectrum to the frequency that reveals what ultraviolet ink contains, my beloved child. Something shifted within the last few days, not in you, around you. The specific, almost imperceptible, people are responding to me slightly differently. Something in how I am being received just changed shift that occurs when the ambient light in a person's environment begins transitioning from the frequency that cannot detect the inscription to the frequency that can. The shift is not in you. The shift is in the light, and light shifts change readings. My dear one, I need you to understand what happens during the transition between ordinary light and ultraviolet light. The change is not instantaneous. It is a gradient. The specific, ordinary fading, ultraviolet intensifying. The two frequencies overlapping during the transition period, where the inscription begins appearing in faint traces before reaching full visibility. The faint traces are the first evidence that the ink is responding to the new frequency. And the traces are what the people around you are beginning to detect, without being able to identify what they are detecting. They are sensing the traces, without knowing what they are sensing. And that is the transition. I have been preparing this lighting change behind every season of the blank readings, while the knowing was eroding, and the diagnosis was suppressing, and the yielding was pulling the almost visible back beneath the surface. I was at the light source, calibrating the frequency, timing the activation, ensuring the ultraviolet would be switched on at the specific season, when the inscription's message would produce its maximum effect on the eyes that have been reading blank. My child, the calibration is complete. The frequency is shifting, and the traces are already appearing on a surface the people around you are about to read for the first time. Type traces appearing if something shifted in how people are responding to you within the last few days. A change you cannot identify but can feel. And the shift is the ambient light, beginning its transition from ordinary frequency to ultraviolet frequency, meaning the inscription is producing faint traces that people around you are detecting without knowing what they are detecting, because the lighting change God has been calibrating is beginning its activation, and the traces are the first evidence that the blank readings are about to become full readings. Everyone around you is about to see what I see in you, and you need to prepare for the shift. The title carries that specific sequence because the seeing that is about to happen is not a gradual, person by person, one eye at a time recognition, but a simultaneous, everyone at once. The light changed for the entire room revelation that makes the inscription visible to every eye in the environment at the same moment. My dear one, I need you to understand the weight of the word everyone. The title does not say someone around you is about to see, does not say a few people will begin to notice. Says everyone, because the lighting change is not a spotlight aimed at one observer. It is an ambient shift, a room level, environment-wide, every eye affected at the same frequency change in the light conditions that makes the inscription readable to every person in the viewer's immediate world, simultaneously, everyone, at the same time, under the same changed light. My beloved child, this is directly connected to the title and to the specific loneliness the unseen carrying has been producing. The title says, prepare for the shift. The preparation is not about you changing. The inscription does not need editing. The surface does not need cleaning. The preparation is about receiving what simultaneous recognition produces in a person whose experience has been consistent non-recognition. Because the distance between being seen by no one and being seen by everyone at once is a distance the system needs to be prepared for. My child, the shift from invisible to visible is not a gentle introduction. The shift is a frequency change that activates the entire inscription simultaneously, meaning the people around you will not see a portion of what was written. They will see all of it at once, under the new light. And the all of it is more than any single person has ever read on your surface, because no single person has ever had the light source the inscription requires. The all of it is about to become visible, and the all of it exceeds what even you have been believing is there. The ultraviolet frequency is reaching full activation right now, my beloved child, and the specific, every letter becoming legible. The inscription is surfacing at full clarity. The blank surface, about to display everything that was written, intensification that the frequency is producing on the surface. The people around you have been reading as empty is the final stage. Before the simultaneous visibility, the title was warning you to prepare for. I need you to feel the proximity of the full reveal. Not the trace level, something is shifting. People are sensing, without identifying proximity, the transition has been producing. The full, the specific, every word visible, every line readable, the complete inscription displayed at once, every eye in the room reading simultaneously proximity of a lighting change, whose frequency has reached the activation threshold, where ultraviolet ink transitions from faintly detectable to fully legible. The threshold is being crossed right now, and crossed thresholds do not reverse. My dear one, everything has been building toward this threshold. The inscription that was written before the first relationship had the chance to read it. The blank readings that accumulated into a verdict. The knowing that eroded under the weight of consistent non-recognition. The diagnosis that classified the knowing as self-deception. The suppression that pulled the almost visible back beneath the surface. The yielding that felt like maturity. The traces that appeared when the frequency began shifting. And now, the threshold, the specific frequency at full activation, ink responding at full visibility. The entire inscription about to be displayed under light that finally matches the ink threshold that the lighting change has been building toward since the God who wrote the inscription began calibrating the light source for this season. My child, the threshold does not produce partial visibility. Ultraviolet light at full activation does not reveal some letters while leaving others hidden. Full activation reveals the complete inscription, every word, every line, every dimension of what was written in the ink the ordinary light could never detect. And the complete inscription contains more than the knowing was carrying, because the knowing was the faint internal detection of an inscription whose full content exceeds what internal sensing alone could capture. The full content is about to be displayed, and full exceeds what even the knowing predicted. Type full activation if the ultraviolet frequency is crossing the threshold from trace level detection to full legibility display. Every word surfacing, every line becoming readable, the complete inscription about to be visible to every eye simultaneously, and the full content of what was written exceeds what even your internal knowing was carrying, because the knowing was the faint detection of an inscription whose complete message is larger than what internal sensing alone could capture, and the full display is about to reveal more than the eroded knowing had been maintaining. The light just changed. The inscription is fully visible, and the surface that every person in your immediate world has been scanning under ordinary light and reading as blank is now displaying the complete message God wrote in ultraviolet ink before anyone around you had the capacity to see what was always there. Every word legible, every line present, the full inscription revealed to every eye in the room at the same moment under the same changed light. My beloved child, this is the moment. The moment the blank becomes written. The moment every eye that was reporting nothing significant encounters a surface covered in an inscription so detailed, so permanent, so clearly authored by a hand whose writing carries divine authority, that the previous blank readings are immediately, retroactively, irrevocably exposed as the light source limitation they always were. The moment the gap between what God sees in you and what the people around you see in you collapses, not because the inscription changed, but because the light did. The gap just collapsed. By the light matching the ink, everyone around you is about to see what I see in you. The title said everyone. The light confirms it. The title said what I see. The inscription reveals it. And what is being displayed on the surface of a person whose immediate world has been reading blank for the duration of the ordinary light season is the specific, God-authored, ultraviolet written, permanent, complete, unfaded, carrying its full message since, before the first, blank reading was performed inscription that says everything the non-recognition was denying. My child, the inscription says what you carry is real. The inscription says what you sensed about yourself was not self-deception. The inscription says the knowing was the faint internal detection of something written on you by a God whose handwriting is only visible under a light source the ordinary world does not provide. And the inscription says more than the knowing ever captured, because the full display under the activated light reveals dimensions the internal sensing could only detect as a general awareness that something significant was present. The something is now specific, visible, and being read by every eye in the room, now that the light has changed and the inscription is fully visible, and every eye in the room is reading what was always written, everything about the blank reading identity that governed your relationship with what you carry is being permanently dismantled by the evidence of a surface covered in God-authored writing that the ordinary light was always incapable of detecting. My dear child, this is what happens when a person whose knowing was eroded by consistent non-recognition encounters the simultaneous recognition of every person in their immediate world at the same moment. The erosion does not merely reverse, it is overwhelmed, because the volume of recognition produced by every eye reading the full inscriptions simultaneously exceeds what any individual recognition could have communicated, meaning the simultaneous visibility communicates more about the inscription's reality than even a single person's gradual recognition could have. Simultaneous overwhelms what gradual could never have produced. My beloved child, the overwhelming is producing cascading effects across every area of your identity where the blank readings were governing your self-belief. The diagnosis that classified the knowing as self-deception is being demolished, because the inscription, now visible to every eye, confirms that the knowing was the accurate detection of something written, not the manufactured compensation of something imagined. The suppression that was pulling the almost visible back beneath the surface is dissolving, because the light change made the inscription fully visible without the person needing to push anything toward the surface. The yielding that surrendered the knowing to the readings is being reversed, because the readings just changed under the new light, and the new readings confirm the knowing the old readings were contradicting. The knowing was right. The readings were limited, and limited readings corrected by unlimited light produce the vindication the knowing was always deserving. And the people around you are not merely noticing something new. They are reading something that was always there. The distinction matters, because always there carries a different weight than recently appeared. Type always written if the blank reading identity just collapsed under the evidence of a fully visible inscription. The diagnosis demolished, the suppression dissolving, the yielding reversing. Because the simultaneous recognition of every eye reading what was always there is confirming the knowing the blank readings were contradicting, and what is being seen is not something new appearing on the surface, but something permanent being revealed by a light change that made readable. What was always written in ink the ordinary light could never detect. Let me show you what your life looks like now that the inscription is visible, and the light has changed, and every eye in the room is reading what was always written. Because a person whose ultraviolet inscription just became readable under activated light moves through the world at a recognized capacity the blank reading version could never access, my dear one. The first thing that changes is the entering. You have been entering rooms carrying the expectation of non-recognition. The specific, they will not see what I carry. I will be present without being truly seen. The inscription will remain invisible in this room the way it remained invisible in every previous room entry protocol that the blank reading season installed as the default expectation before every threshold was crossed. The entry protocol just became obsolete because the light changed in every room. My beloved child, the mornings change permanently. You have been waking into the invisible, the first conscious awareness of each day, processing the familiar. The inscription is still unreadable. I will carry what is written without anyone seeing it condition that the ordinary light season was producing as the default morning reality. Tomorrow you wake into the visible. The morning processes at a different level because the light that changed is not a temporary spotlight, but a permanent frequency shift, meaning the inscription does not become invisible again. When the morning ends, the inscription remains readable under the activated light indefinitely. Visible mornings carry the full inscription openly. Invisible mornings carried it hidden. The responses you receive from your immediate world are going to shift at the foundational level. People who were interacting with the blank reading version of you were calibrating their treatment of you to what they saw, which was nothing significant. People interacting with the inscription visible version of you will calibrate their treatment to what they now see, which is everything God wrote. And everything God wrote calibration produces a different quality of response than nothing significant calibration. The responses are recalibrating to the inscription. Starting now, people around you are going to respond to the inscription before you explain the light change. Because a person whose God authored ultraviolet writing just became visible under activated light produces an atmospheric legibility that the invisible inscription version could never generate, regardless of how significant what was written always was, my beloved child. The ones who knew you during the blank reading season, who interacted with the inscription invisible version, who scanned the surface under ordinary light and processed what they saw as the complete picture of who you are, who formed their understanding of your capacity and your calling and your significance from readings performed under conditions that could not detect the ink. The most important information was written in. Those people are about to read the surface for the first time. They will say they never realized. They will mean the light just revealed what was always there. My child, there is a specific quality a person carries when the inscription that was always written becomes readable to every surrounding eye simultaneously. The quality is not self-promotion finally landing. It is the specific, I did not change, but what is visible about me did. The light shifted, and the surface, now displaying what was always inscribed quality of a person who is being recognized, not for something they performed, but for something that was written on them before they had any say in the writing. The quality is authored visibility, and authored visibility carries a weight that self-generated visibility cannot replicate. Connections that require the specific atmospheric quality of a person whose God-authored inscription is now publicly readable are approaching the visible version right now. There are opportunities and assignments whose formation demands the specific, divinely inscribed, permanently written, light-activated legibility that only a person whose inscription which was authored by the God who also controls the light source can carry. My dear one, what approaches authored visibility is calibrated to the inscription's content, and inscription-calibrated connections exceed anything the blank reading version was attracting. Type authored visibility if the inscription becoming readable is producing a quality that self-promotion could never replicate. The specific, God-authored, permanently written, light-activated legibility of a person being recognized not for something performed but for something inscribed, and connections requiring the atmospheric weight of divinely authored visibility are approaching, because what the activated light revealed about the surface exceeds what any self-generated presentation could communicate, and inscription-calibrated opportunities were always invisible to the blank reading version. I need you to understand why I wrote the inscription in ultraviolet ink rather than ordinary ink that would have been visible from the beginning, because the ink choice reveals something about the kind of visibility I always intended for you that ordinary ink visibility could never have produced. My beloved child, I could have written in ordinary ink. The inscription would have been visible from birth. Every person in your life would have read the surface accurately from the first interaction. The gifts would have been seen. The calling would have been recognized. The depth would have been acknowledged, and the knowing would never have been questioned, because the external readings would have confirmed it from the beginning. Ordinary ink produces early visibility. Ultraviolet ink produces timed visibility, and I chose timed. My child, timed visibility produces a different quality of recognition than early visibility. A person whose inscription was visible from the beginning is recognized without the contrast of having been unseen. A person whose inscription becomes visible after a season of blank readings is recognized with the full force of the contrast. The specific, this was here the entire time. How did we miss this? The inscription is not new, but our reading is impact that timed visibility produces in the eyes that were previously reading blank. The contrast amplifies the recognition. An amplified recognition produces amplified response. My dear one, I chose you for the ultraviolet inscription because the assignment embedded in the inscription requires the amplified recognition that only contrast-produced visibility generates. The assignment does not merely need people to see what you carry. The assignment needs people to see what you carry with the specific. This has been here all along. The surface was never blank. We're reading under the wrong light recognition that produces the particular quality of response that post-blank reading visibility creates in the people whose eyes were limited by the light they were reading under. You were given ultraviolet ink because the assignment requires the contrast. And the contrast requires the season of blank readings the contrast is measured against. The doubt surfacing right now is using the most erosion-hardened objection in its inventory. The voice that says the people around you will see the inscription and still dismiss it the way they dismissed whatever traces of it were visible during the ordinary light season, because recognition requires not just visibility, but the willingness of the reader to accept what they are reading. My child, it sounds like this. Making the inscription visible does not guarantee the people around me will value what they see. They could see the inscription and still decide it is not significant. They could read the full writing and still conclude it does not change their assessment. Visibility is not the same as recognition, and recognition is not the same as response. The light could change, and the inscription could appear, and the same people who were reading blank under ordinary light could read the inscription under ultraviolet light and still decide the person carrying it is not what the inscription claims they are. That doubt just applied the reading behavior of ordinary light to the reading conditions of ultraviolet light, and the two produce different responses in the reader. My beloved child, ordinary light produces an ambiguous surface. Under ordinary light, the reader is forming their own assessment based on what ordinary conditions reveal, which is partial, which is surface level, which is open to interpretation. Ultraviolet light does not produce ambiguity. Ultraviolet light produces inscription, the specific, clearly authored, unmistakably written. This was placed here by Somyeon Ho's handwriting carries authority, clarity that does not invite interpretation but demands reading. The readers will not have the option to dismiss, because authored inscriptions under activated light do not present themselves as suggestions the reader can decline. They present themselves as statements the reader must process. The inscription is not a suggestion about who you might be. It is a statement about who you are, and statements authored by God under activated divine light do not produce the same dismissal that ambiguous surfaces under ordinary light permitted. Type statement, not suggestion. If the doubt warned that visibility does not guarantee recognition, and the distinction the doubt cannot account for is that ordinary light produces ambiguous surfaces open to interpretation, while ultraviolet light produces authored inscriptions that do not invite dismissal but demand reading, meaning the people who previously read blank under ordinary conditions will not have the option to dismiss what is now legible, because God-authored statements under activated divine light do not present as suggestions the reader can decline, but as inscriptions the reader must process. During every season, the inscription was invisible to the people around you. I was not at the light source, waiting for the activation moment, while the person carrying the inscription endured the blank readings without the presence of the one who wrote the words. I was beside the inscription, my beloved child, reading it at full clarity, in every room where every other eye was reading nothing. You imagined a God who wrote the inscription and then stepped back to observe from a sovereign distance whether the person carrying it would maintain their knowing long enough to survive until the light changed. Whose involvement during the invisible season was limited to the authorship of the writing, without the personal presence beside the writing, while the writing was being unread by every eye the person was surrounded by. I was never at a distance during the invisible season. I was at the surface, reading what no one else could. My child, being beside an inscription that is being read as blank by every person in the room, while the God beside it is reading every word at full clarity, is a specific form of divine presence. The presence is not passive. It is the active, every word being read. I see what they cannot quality of a God whose light source is not dependent on the ambient conditions the room is providing. My reading of you was never affected by the light conditions the people around you were limited to. There were seasons during the invisible period when the erosion was at its deepest, when the accumulated blank readings had reduced the knowing to its thinnest remaining thread, and the person carrying the inscription was closest to accepting the diagnosis that classified the knowing as self-deception. In those seasons, I was beside the inscription, reading it at full volume. The God whose reading never dimmed, standing next to a person whose belief in what was written was nearly extinguished. My dear one, the reading that never dimmed is why the inscription never faded. Authored ink under the author's continued reading does not degrade. Even when every other reader sees nothing, I know the exact blank reading that produced the deepest erosion. The specific person at the specific moment whose failure to see what was written on you carried enough relational weight that the blank reading was absorbed by the knowing as the definitive vote that tipped the verdict from maybe the inscription is real to probably the inscription is not, my dear one. Not the first blank reading, not the most recent. The one that tipped the verdict, the specific person whose proximity to you was close enough, and whose opinion carried enough authority in your system that their reading of the surface was processed, not as one more data point among many, but as the deciding vote. The reading that collapsed the remaining confidence, the knowing, was maintaining against the accumulated weight of every previous blank reading. My beloved child, I know that reading because I was at the surface when the tipping occurred. The tipping is the threshold where the knowing shifts from holding its ground against the external data to yielding to it. Below the threshold, the knowing maintains itself despite the blank readings. Above the threshold, the knowing begins deferring to the readings. And the person whose blank reading tipped the verdict was the person whose relational authority in your system carried enough weight to push the accumulated data past the threshold. The tipping person did not intend the tipping. They simply read under ordinary light and reported what ordinary light reveals, which is nothing. About ultraviolet ink, my child, the God who was at the surface during the tipping vote, is the God confirming tonight that the vote was cast by an eye reading under the wrong light, and that a vote cast under wrong light does not carry the authority the knowing assigned to it. The person's relational proximity was real. The person's reading was limited, and limited readings by proximate people do not outrank authored inscriptions by the God whose handwriting is on the surface. The proximate person was reading as blank. The tipping vote is being overturned by the light that just changed. Type vote overturned if God just identified the specific person whose blank reading tipped the verdict from maybe real to probably not. And the tipping vote is being overturned tonight because the vote was cast by an eye reading under ordinary light that cannot detect ultraviolet ink, meaning the relational authority the person's reading carried in your system never outranked the authorial authority of the God whose handwriting is on the surface. The person was reading as blank, and the activated light is reversing the verdict the tipping vote installed. Now that the light has changed and the inscription is fully visible, and the verdict has been overturned, there is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it is the instruction that determines whether the visible inscription is received by the people around you as the authored statement it is, or whether the suppression, the blank reading season installed, interferes with the display the activated light is now producing. Stop suppressing. Not gradually reduce the suppression over a cautious timeline that allows you to test whether the visibility is safe before allowing the full inscription to be displayed without interference. Stop. The suppression was the blank reading season's governance over the inscription's visibility from the inside. The internal retraction that was pulling the almost visible back beneath the surface every time the writing approached readability. The light has changed. The inscription is visible, and the suppression that was managing the display from the inside is now interfering with a display that the activated light is producing from the outside. My child, the light is doing the revealing. The suppression is fighting the revealing. And the two cannot coexist. The activated light pushes the inscription toward full display. The suppression pulls the inscription toward concealment, and the tension between the pushing and the pulling is producing a muted display. The inscription visible but dimmed by the internal resistance of a system whose blank reading season programming is still running inside a person whose external light conditions have already changed. The programming must be stopped, not gradually overridden. Stopped, because the light that was activated is producing full display conditions, and full display conditions require a surface that is not resisting the display from within. When the suppression stops, the inscription will reach its full brightness under the activated light. The brightness is not something you produce. It is something the light produces on an unsuppressed surface. Your assignment is not to shine. Your assignment is to stop dimming what the light is already revealing. Stop suppressing. The light is doing the work. Let it. You made it to the activated light, my beloved child. And I need you to stand in the visibility long enough to feel what it means, to have the inscription that was always written on you become readable to every eye that was previously scanning the surface and reporting blank where everything was inscribed. Feel the visibility, not the blank readings, not the seasons of non-recognition that eroded the knowing at the layer where your confidence in what you carry was being maintained against the accumulated votes of every eye reading under the wrong light, not the diagnosis that classified the knowing as self-deception, not the suppression that was pulling the almost visible back beneath the surface every time the inscription approached readability, the visibility, the specific, every word displayed, every line legible, every eye reading. The light changed and the surface is no longer blank visibility that the activated ultraviolet frequency is producing on an inscription that was always there and is now being read for the first time by every person whose previous reading was limited by the light they were looking under. The inscription is being read, and read feels like the opposite of everything the blank readings were teaching. I want to thank you for something the invisible season made almost impossible to sustain. Thank you for the knowing. Thank you for the faint, internal, I sense something significant about what I carry detection that the Spirit was maintaining, while every external reading was contradicting it. Thank you for the thread of knowing that survived the erosion and the tipping vote and the diagnosis and the suppression, the thread that was still present when the light changed, because the thread was connected to the inscription, and the inscription was connected to the author, and the author was reading at full clarity beside a person whose every other reader was reading blank. My dear child, thank you for not fully accepting the blank readings as the final verdict, because a person who fully accepts the blank readings erases the knowing entirely, and erased knowing cannot receive the vindication the activated light produces. You kept a thread. The thread survived, and the surviving thread is what the visibility is now vindicating. Let the tears come, not invisible tears, not blank reading tears, visibility tears. The tears of a person whose inscription is being read for the first time by every eye in the room, undone by the quiet, overwhelming, it was always their vindication of a knowing that was almost extinguished by the readings of people who were never looking under the right light. Type visibility tears if tears are forming right now, because the inscription is being read for the first time by every surrounding eye. And the tears are not the grief of the invisible season, but the vindication of a knowing that survived the erosion and the tipping vote and the diagnosis and the suppression, because the thread that remained was connected to the author, who was reading at full clarity the entire time, and the light just changed. And what was always written is finally being seen by everyone who was previously reading blank. You are not the blank surface anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one whose inscription was read as nothing by every eye in the immediate world, because the light conditions the ordinary world provides cannot detect what ultraviolet ink contains. The one whose knowing was eroded by accumulated blank readings until the knowing yielded to the readings, and the yielding felt like maturity. The one who diagnosed the internal sense of significance as self-deception, because the external evidence was unanimous in its failure to detect what the internal evidence was faintly insisting was present. The one whose suppression was pulling the almost visible back beneath the surface every time the inscription approached readability. Because the blank reading season taught the person that displaying what no one can see produces more pain than concealing what no one is looking for. That identity was permanently retired the moment the light changed, and the frequency shifted and the ultraviolet activated, and the inscription that was always written appeared at full legibility to every eye in the room simultaneously, and the blank readings were retroactively exposed as the light source limitation they always were. You are the visible inscription now, and visible changes everything the blank readings were teaching. The blank reading identity that governed your self-belief, your entering, your sharing, your relationship with what you carry, the diagnosis that classified the knowing as compensation, the suppression that managed the display from within, and the yielding that surrendered the knowing to readings performed under the wrong light, has been permanently overwhelmed by the evidence of a full inscription displayed under activated ultraviolet frequency, authored by God, permanent since before the first blank reading, unfaded through every season of non-recognition, and now readable to every eye that was previously limited by the light the ordinary world was providing. My dear child, the inscription was never the variable. The light was always the variable, and the variable just changed. From this moment forward, you carry the identity of a person whose God writes in ultraviolet ink and controls the light source, not a person who carries what cannot be seen. A person whose inscription was always permanent, and whose visibility was always a matter of timing rather than a matter of content. Not a person who suppresses what no one is reading, a person whose surface is now displaying at full legibility under light, that the God who wrote the inscription personally activated at the season, the inscription's message would produce its maximum impact on the eyes that were previously reading blank. The light changed, the inscription appeared, the readings changed, and the person whose surface was scanned by every surrounding eye and reported as blank is now being read at full clarity by the same eyes under the same changed light. Every word visible, every line present, the full inscription displayed on a surface that was never empty but was always carrying its complete message in ink. The ordinary world was never equipped to detect. The knowing was right. The readings were limited. The inscription was permanent. And the God who authored every word and chose ultraviolet ink and timed the light activation to this specific season is the same God standing beside the visible inscription tonight, confirming that what the people around you are now reading is what He has been reading clearly the entire time. Not something new on a previously blank surface, but something permanent becoming visible under a light source whose activation was always going to happen at exactly this moment for exactly this person in exactly this season. Everyone around you is about to see what I see in you. The title said everyone. The light confirmed it. The inscription is displayed. The readings are changing. And the person who was carrying the loneliness of being known without being truly seen is now standing in a room where every eye is reading what was always written, finally receiving the simultaneous recognition that the invisible season was always building toward. Stand in the visibility, my beloved child. The inscription is yours, the authorship is mine, the light is activated, and the God who wrote on you before anyone around you had the capacity to read what was written, is confirming tonight that the inscription was never the question, and the knowing was never self-deception, and the blank readings were never the verdict, and the visibility that just arrived is not the beginning of something new on the surface, but the revealing of everything that was always there, authored permanently, carried faithfully, detected faintly by a knowing the erosion almost extinguished, and now displayed fully under a light that will not return to the ordinary frequency, because the God who activated the light does not reverse the illumination of his own handwriting. Subscribe to this channel so that every time God activates the ultraviolet light over an inscription, the reading reaches you before the blank reading identity convinces you the surface is empty. You are not a person whose inscription goes unread anymore. You are a person whose God authored what is written and activated the light that makes it visible, and timed the visibility to the season the inscription's message produces its maximum impact. The next message carries the first full display report from a surface being read at complete legibility. And what the inscription reveals, when every eye in the room is reading what was always written, will prove that the knowing was always accurate, and the blank readings were always limited, and the inscription was always permanent, and the light was always coming. Type inscription revealed if you are leaving this message permanently changed. Knowing the blank readings were light source limitations, not surface content verdicts. The knowing was accurate detection, not self-deception. The yielding was never maturity, but was always the knowing surrendering to readings performed under the wrong light. The suppression was the blank reading season's governance, and the governance just ended. The tipping vote was cast by an eye that could not see ultraviolet ink. And the God who wrote up the inscriptions before anyone around you had the capacity to read it, is confirming tonight that everyone is about to see what he has always seen, because the light just changed and the inscription just appeared. And what is written on you is permanent and authored and complete, and the visibility that just arrived is the light finally matching the ink the ordinary world was never equipped to detect.